Every human being has the ability to survive and overcome the challenges that we face. I promise you, today is not the day to quit. Today is the day to keep going. There are no hard decisions. There's only hard consequences. The decision to accept meaning is within us. What is that meaning in our lives that will sustain us through these dark hours? Meaning in my life is to take whatever abilities God has given me and use them to their most optimal outcome, for their most optimal purpose. Anytime you decide to take an action, you are opening yourself up almost the guaranteed outcome that something will happen that is unexpected and that is probably going to hurt some. I think it's important to not just focus on the losses. If all you do is focus on the losses, this is a very negative place. The things that you go through in life may have felt like they have stripped one of their choices, but they actually haven't. A person can make a choice today that I will start making better choices, or we can choose to just focus on how terrible the situation is. And doing the former does not mean that the situation is not terrible. It just means that we are making a conscious choice to find the things that we can be grateful for. Don't quit because the Creator is moving the universe to your favor, and probably in a way that is more than you could possibly think or imagine.
An exploration of trauma, transformation, and triumph. Your healing starts here. And we are back with another episode of Through the Trauma Podcast. I am Amber, your host, and today I have with me a very special guest. He has written a book called Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks, and he's definitely had a lot of dark moments over the course of his lifetime that he will dive into, share some of these things with us. Some of those things have to do with overcoming stage 4 cancer, losing one of his sons to suicide, and some childhood trauma as well. We're going to get into all of that, but I'd like for you to welcome Andy Campbell. Andy, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing so much of your story with us.
Yeah, Amber, thank you so much for having me. The gratitude is all mine. I appreciate it.
When I was reading through your bio, it's a lot. And I know before we jumped on, I told you, I don't know that I've interviewed anyone that has gone through so much trauma in their life. So I am very interested in hearing more about you, hearing more about your perspective, because I know all of this trauma has kind of gave you a unique perspective on life and triumph and overcoming. First, before we jump into it, is there anything else that you really want to share with my audience as far as who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I would say that as we walk through this, I would want people to remember that, or to know that, every human being has the ability to survive and overcome the challenges that we face. And so the purpose of sharing this is not to say, look at me, look at what I've done. It's to say, I probably have some empathy for at least something close to what you may be going through. And I promise you, today is not the day to quit. Today is the day to keep going. So you can do this. It may just not feel like it right now. So I would ask, that listeners take that into consideration as they hear the story, that the intent is to encourage people to continue forward.
And that's such great advice. I know that we just recently released an episode all about suicide. And I think in the middle of depression and sadness, you don't really resonate with the fact that you are needed in this world and that you have a purpose. Everybody has a purpose. And I love what you said about just not giving up. And, there's a reason that you're still here. And I just wish people could really embody that and embrace that.
Yeah, living through my son's passing, his taking of his own life, I used to have conversations with him because we knew for years that he was struggling with this. And I would always say, the one decision you shouldn't make is the one that is irreversible. And I've kind of come to say that differently now, which is, someone asked me one time, what are you most proud of having been through these things? Like, if you could have some, to have some being proud of something you have accomplished, what would it be? And I said, the one thing that I'm most proud of is that I have not ultimately taken out of God's hands his ability to change the universe to my favor. Right? Like, I never took that away from him. And I think that's ultimately suicide does do that. It takes away, because, we're not on this earth very long. So the struggle to stay alive is a short period of time, even though it may feel like an eternity in the moment. But I just believe we have to give the Creator the time needed to shape the universe for our benefit.
Yeah, that's really profound. And I think I'm understanding, what you're saying is that you have to give God the space because sometimes in the hardship you don't stay there. Is that what you're saying? Like we're gonna experience hardship in this life, but
Yeah.
the goal is
I go back to the thing that happened to me when I was going through cancer treatment. It's one of the core beliefs is there are no hard decisions. There's only hard consequences. And there's like a whole thought process behind that. The idea is that, yes, it takes time to move everything in the universe in just such a way for you as an individual. And that usually takes longer than I want it to. Right. Like I think, I'm at my limit. You're really not at your limit. If you were at your limit, then things would have already shifted. So you're not there yet. But if you persist, it does take time even for the creator to move the whole universe around. Right. Because he's doing that for everybody. So he's doing it for you too. It just takes time. And I just believe you never want to take away the opportunity from God to do for you more than you can imagine is possible. Right. Because what your angst and impatience is based on what you see as possible. But he may be working on something that you can't even comprehend. Right. So that obviously might take a little longer than what you can comprehend. So if you kind of can hang on to that and wait, even in the darkest hours, wait for him to move things, I believe that many times he does move things in our favor.
So what advice would you give someone, say that you're having this conversation with them? I mean, there's a couple of words that come to my mind, like faith.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that faith. You have to have patience. You have to have, I mean, there's like almost like a seeing of spiritually what's happening.
Yeah.
Sometimes too. Like, is there other things that maybe would come to your mind as far as like telling someone like, hey, this is pushing through and trusting that eventually it's going to work out?
Yeah, I struggled with a lot of these things through these experiences, and I was going through. I was with a therapist after my son's passing. I was doing, if you've heard of EMDR, I was doing EMDR therapy, and she said, "Andy, what is your meaning in life?" And I said, "Well, I'm a husband, I'm a father, And she goes, "No, what's your meaning in life?" And I said, "I don't. I thought I just told you." And she said, "I want you to read this book, and it's." If you've ever heard of Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning, right? And so I read it and I thought, yeah, I want a chance to be the 1 in 28. That's that made it out of the camps alive, right? I want to be that. I want to at least have a chance. I may not make it out, but to have an opportunity to make it out, you had to have meaning. You had to have something that would carry you forward more than just hope that someone would show up and save you or that something. You had to have meaning in spite of what the outcome was. And so I would add to the list that you have. Faith is certainly key to that, love, hope. But I think some of those kind of wrapped up go to what Frankel was describing as meaning. So I would say, and you can get a hold of that meaning while you're struggling. Like in that moment, if you can find meaning, it can shift. It has for me, it has shifted the perspective in that moment to say, wait a second, with that meaning, I do have the ability to keep going, right? Like I have this reason to not quit today. And so I would add to your list all excellent words. I would add meaning to that list.
What do you think that meaning, like, say someone is in the midst of something traumatic and they're going through things and they're searching for meaning? Like, how does one find that? Is it in themselves?
I think the decision to accept meaning is within us. I think we are all unique in what is that meaning in our lives that will sustain us through these dark hours, right? Each one of us has a different kind of set of meaning. And I think his meaning, I interpreted the way Frankl discussed it as being not your meaning in the sense of what you do for someone else, but what is your meaning? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why, as an example, those who went to the gas chambers with meaning, they had meaning in their life, but they still perished, but they died with meaning, right? As opposed to people who died with no meaning. And we're all going to die. So one of our choices in life is, I think we have at least two choices. One is, generally speaking, what mindset will we have when we die, right? Because we can't choose how we die, but what will be the mindset that we have when we die? And the other one is, what will we leave behind? What will we leave other generations as our kind of our spiritual legacy, right? Our characteristic legacy, not our money, not our fame, but, did we leave behind determination, perseverance, those things that help people survive?
Uh-huh.
So, a meaning in my life is to take whatever abilities God has given me and use them to their most optimal outcome for their most optimal purpose. And so doing this podcast, doing this interview gives me it meets the definition of meaning for me. It gives me a reason to do things, right? To continue on, even though I may be having trouble walking today or, some problem that's happening. So I think the challenge is that when you're in the struggle is when you really need meaning. It's when you need those characteristics, right? So you don't really think about it. So people say, well, I'm already in this situation. How will I find meaning in this situation? And I would say most times I think that's the only place you can find it is in those difficulties, right? That's where the meaning kind of surfaces and you're like, that's the life raft I needed to carry me through this storm. And so I don't think most people think about meaning when things are going great, People think about meaning when it all hits the fan.
Yeah, or if they start to feel like something's lacking in their lives. I think
Yeah.
sometimes that will force people into looking for meaning or purpose. I've often thought about these things too, but probably from a little bit of a different angle. I read scripture, and when I went through things in my life, one of the scriptures that really had stood out to me was the scripture of all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and is called according to his purpose. And I'm like, if all things work together for good, then it's not in his wheelhouse that he causes bad things to happen. We're in an imperfect world, so bad things are going to happen in the world. But he can use those things to give us power and strength and help us learn how to navigate and how to empower other people or help heal other people. And sometimes that comes in the form of giving advice. Sometimes it comes in the form of sharing our stories. Sometimes it comes in the form of just like putting your hand on someone's shoulder and saying, hey, you know what? I love you. I'm here for you. You know,
100%.
what are your thoughts? Like, have you ever read that verse in scripture?
Yeah. So I grew up in an extremely religious family. I tell people all the time, before I turned the age of 10, I've probably been to more Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday camp meetings, revival weeks. So I've been in church more by the time I was 10 than most people will spend in their lifetimes, right? Like we went to church a lot. My father ended up being a deacon in a church, one thing I would say about church is sheep bite, sheep will bite. And, a lot of times church is like a hospital. You got to remember that, almost every one of us who are going there, we're going there in some way broken or damaged. And so I remember my father had a very bad back. He ended up becoming disabled, but at the time he was a deacon, he had a really bad back problem, which they could probably fix pretty easy today, but in the 70s they could. And so people would question him. It's like, well, almost like Job. It's like, well, if you haven't sinned, then how do you have this problem? Job is a great teacher. I believe it was in Job where he said, well, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. And so the rain falls. And if anybody's ever been on a farm or they have farmed or they've watched a show about farming, you can have rain fall just across, one fence row. And in the field next to it, there's nothing. And you're like, well, well, the rain just falls where the rain falls. We live in a broken world, as you said. And I think do all things work out to the good for those who love the Lord? Eventually, I think there's just, the creator and the universe do not have our timelines. They have a much longer timeline. I don't know what it is. I think it's infinity, but it's longer than mine, right? Whether it's this minute, this hour, this day, this week, this month, this year, or my entire life, it is longer than that. And so, yeah, I think, but then you go through things and you're like, well, this doesn't feel like it's working out for my good. And I don't take from that, I've never taken from scripture that God was saying, look, I'm a parent. I never once, while my child was learning to ride a bicycle, took them and pushed them down so that they could fall and scrape their knees so that they could learn how to apply bandages to a wound. Like I never did that. Okay. Now, if in the course of living, they fell and hurt themselves, I would help them. And then I would explain to them why maybe they would want to do it differently, because in this world, gravity applies. And so if you fall down and you don't have your knee covered, it might cause this same, I can learn a lesson from something without having the lesson have been the object of it. Right. Like that just happened. It happened because I decided I wanted to ride a bike. If I had never decided to ride a bike, I never would have fallen down. right? So anytime you decide to take an action, you are opening yourself up to the opportunity, almost the guaranteed outcome that something will happen that is unexpected and that is probably going to hurt some. You do that every time you get in the car, every time you drive down the street. You could walk to the grocery store, but you don't. And if you're in a crash, did God into? No, you just made a choice to get in a car, and this thing happened. Okay. But I do think God shows up to help us see what we could do differently and how we could do it differently. And then he tends to our wounds. I look at the way that we are as parents and I think, well, I think that's how God is. I don't, as above, so below. I think that's kind of the nature of it. So bad things are going to happen. I don't blame God for those bad things. I don't blame God for my son taking his own life. My son made a decision. It's not the decision that I wanted. We can, go back and forth on, well, obviously there was a mental defect or a mental illness. He took his own life. That mental illness could have been just severe depression. It could have been something else. I mean, he struggled with it, but I don't blame God for that. We're born into a broken world. I have a BRCA1 mutation. It, under the right circumstances, epigenetically, it can contribute to having cancer. It did. It also contributed to the techniques and the targeted therapies that they use to kill the cancer cells. So I just think we should be a little less judgmental about why things happen to ourselves or to other people. And in spite of those things happening, remember that we were all wonderfully made, that we are all an invaluable thread in the fabric of the universe. We were placed here for some reason. We're in these bodies in this moment, in this time, for a reason. I may not fully understand. I probably won't. Even if I thought I knew what my purpose was, I probably won't know until after I'm gone. Like, that's when it'll be like, oh, that's what it was about. Like, I won't know. Everybody's like, well, I need to know my purpose. You may never know your purpose. And as a matter of fact, if you think you have a purpose, it may not have been the purpose that, like you get to the other side and God's like, yeah, well, that wasn't actually, like, this was the purpose. And you're like, wow, I never saw that. So I think there is a greater opportunity to experience happiness and joy, at least momentarily, when one just accepts that we are here. And I think, as you said, can put your hand on someone's shoulder and just let them know that you're here, that you love them, and that you're there if they need you. That's a great purpose, actually, in that moment. Might not have been your life's purpose, but that could be that moment's purpose, for your existence, just to be there to encourage someone else to not quit. So I think we overthink the problem sometimes, right? Sometimes we overthink the problem. So yeah, do I think that it all works out? Yes. Do I think it works out on our time frame? I haven't seen that part yet. Okay.
All right.
I'm confident it works out. I've seen some evidence that it will work out because there have been some things in the near term that have worked out. But I think the ultimate working out just takes a little longer. And I think that's where the faith comes in. But look, I think, look, we overlook simple things. Okay. Has anybody thought today just how wonderful oxygen is?
Right.
Just how wonderful oxygen is. We're not even doing anything and we're breathing. It's just, we just take all these miraculous things for granted. And then we focus on, well, I had this tragedy that occurred. It did occur. And, whether it was learning about stage 4 pancreatic cancer or whether it was later in life dealing with the effects of sexual abuse or whether it was the loss of our son, in his own way, in his own timing, he has been there to bandage the wounds. And so I think sometimes we just got to give him the time and space that he needs to work it out.
I totally agree with you. That's a great way of actually describing that verse. And I think that that's probably like in depth if someone didn't understand, because that's a big question that I think a lot of people will ask when it comes to, does God cause these things to happen? And it's a question a lot of people have. But I think how you described it's perfect, especially for someone who has gone through so many different things in so many areas and transitions in life. You've been through these things. I think going through things does make us start to register in our mind, like, why? We ask ourselves questions that we probably wouldn't ask ourselves if we weren't going through these things. Why did this happen? Why? And then this is how God is able to answer us and show us. And if we approach that with an open heart and an open mind and a genuine curiosity, but I think sometimes people they get angry. And I just been meditating on this whole thing of like victimhood and victim mentality. And it's so easy, just like you said, it's easy for us to fall into ingratitude of like the oxygen that we breathe, or that our heart is beating, or that we have eyesight, like the little things that we just think of that we can take for granted on a day-to-day basis. I think it's also easy for us just to disregard all of the good things that are happening, and we just disregard it. We don't even think about it, which I think this is where gratitude comes in too.
A lot of times, this is I admit I like to go on a particular cruise line and I like to play slots. Okay, I do. So no one who gambles has ever told you about all the times they've lost. Okay, they'll only tell you about the times. I mean, it's not just a cliche. It's true. Like everybody's like, oh, look, I won $1,200. You're like, well, how much did it take you to get there? Well, about 3,000. So they talk about the wins. I think conversely, on a daily basis, some of us, I know I do, have almost the opposite challenge. We never talk about the wins. All we talk about are the difficulties and losses. And I think that's kind of what people are trying to say when, they're like, you should kind of be in a state of gratitude. Some of the things that people tell you to do, but no one ever tells you how to do them, right? So they tell you what to do. And then you spend, 20, 30, 40, 50 years stumbling around trying to figure out how to do it. Forgiveness is one of those things. But it's like you got to forgive. Nobody tells you like the step-by-step process, one of them anyway, for how to reach a place where you can forgive. But we have the ability to make the choice, and if you don't want to call it gratitude, like, there's some people just have blocks with words. There's certain words that I get a block with, and I'm like, I don't like that word. But, look, I can go online and I can see, because, you use like a little player's card. So you can see how much you've won and lost, because it tracks. And I think I think that's what people sometimes like, when, people say, hey, if, you need to have like a gratitude jar, or you need to have you need to journal and write some things down. All we're really doing is keeping track of those things that balance out the negatives in life that we would not normally pay attention to. So what we're really doing is kind of flipping the gambler's problem on its head. And we're saying, the gambler says everything's positive when there's a lot of negative in it, in the gambling. You're going to lose a lot. They don't build those casinos because you won. They build them because you lost. And so life, though, is built on winning. And in your world, in my world, I think it's important to not just focus on the losses. If all you do is focus on the losses, this is a very negative place.
That's right.
It is not an easy place to survive. So you've got to give yourself an opportunity. And that is a decision that we can choose to make. And it's not lying to yourself. It's not candy coating it. It's not wearing rose-colored glasses. The fact that we have oxygen is a real benefit to us. The fact that we got up out of the bed this morning, the fact that we had a bed to sleep in, the idea that we, can go do what we want to. And so someone's frustrated at traffic. You're in a car, okay? Most likely you have air conditioning. Yes, it's going to take you a while. But, if all you're doing is focusing on the negative, then the world will become unbearably difficult. And so I think that's what prayer does. I think it's one of the reasons why God told us, to have fellowship with other people. I think it's one of the things that people experience when they go to church. They, for my oldest son, he spends time in nature a lot. He does, like he's an Instagram influencer, and he travels and go. But his whole mission in life, it's kind of a religious mission, is because of the difficulties, like my son's passing. He found that where he found God was in God's creation. And sometimes it's difficult to find God in man's creation. And so his idea was he spends his purpose, his meaning in life is to help people find God in God's creation. So he encourages people to get outside, right? His tagline is go out there. And so go out there, and that's where God is. He's not sitting in a concrete. I mean, he can be, obviously, but that concrete building, made of reinforced concrete and glass, that's man's creation. And sometimes it's hard to feel God's love inside that. Go someplace where you can just feel it. So that's a choice, is my point. It's a choice. And I think that's the difference between being a victim and not being a victim. Is, as a victim, you have no choice. When I was sexually abused as a child, I really had no consent. I had no choice in that matter. Okay. It took me a long time to come to that conclusion. But when you're a child and you're sexually abused, you don't have a choice. You're there. As an adult, I do have choices, right? And the things that you go through in life may have felt like they have stripped one of their choices, but they actually haven't. A person can make a choice today that I will start making better choices, right? That's a choice. I will begin today to meditate on, contemplate, at least allow my mind for 1 minute a day to think about the things that have gone well for me today. And that then can become a habit. So I think we have choices even when we think we don't. And I think that really is a key to being resilient and to surviving obstacles is to believe that you do still have some choice in the matter.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard this, what we focus on expands. And so if we're focused on negative all the time, that's going to expand in our lives. Like we're going to notice that. Tony Robbins, I think it's Tony Robbins that says this, like if you say, well, I went to a I heard him speak in person once, and he did this thing where he's like, okay, look around the room and find the color blue or whatever. See all the things that's blue. And now close your eyes. And you close your eyes and he's like, now tell me something that was brown. You're right. Like, I don't know. I only noticed the blue things. And it's the same. Like it's the same if we're focused on all the negative things. We don't even see the positive.
You can't. You can't. That's where your focus is. And that's kind of what I'm sure he would say it much more eloquently than I would say it, but that's kind of the intent. It's like, look, you have the choice to shift your focus. You had the choice when he told you to look at blue to say, no, I'm going to look at brown, but you didn't. You're like, okay, my choice is to do what he instructed me to do. But once you make that choice, then your focus will be where you put it.
Yeah.
And so even without his prompting, you can make a decision that today I will see things that are colored brown. I will see things that are not as negative, or I will believe that even in the midst of this, there is something that I can take with me that when I survive this, I will be able to use a lesson from it, right? I didn't have this happen to me to get the lesson, but now that I'm here, it would seem like a waste not to take something with me. And yeah, so it's one of the core beliefs is, every challenge has a chewy nougat center made of opportunity. And so I think in pictures. I mean, I hear things in pictures. Say a word, I hear a picture. And so I created these little meta phrases. They kind of describe like whole pictures. And that one, I never liked the phrase like every cloud has a silver lining. Because if every cloud had a silver lining, I would just stick with the silver lining. I would never go inside the dark cloud, right? I would just take the silver lining and move on to the next thing. But that's not how life is. We go through these challenges. And I think to the point that you're making, we can choose while we're in that dark place to find something, to focus our intent on finding something positive we can take with us. Or we can choose to just focus on how terrible the situation is. And doing the former does not mean that the situation is not terrible. It doesn't mean that it's not awful. It doesn't mean that it's not painful. It just means that we are making a conscious choice as often as we can. And we're always going to kind of slide backwards and we're always going to, negativity is going to come in. But it's one of those beliefs that we have to put in place so that we can center ourselves back on making a choice to find the things that we can be grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so good. And of course, we're going to go through times in our lives where I go through times like where and sometimes I think it's spiritual, sometimes it's decisions that I've made, but sometimes I think there is a spiritual attack that happens where if you do have a purpose or a God-given thing that he's pushing you towards doing, then you can go into these depressions or whatever, these things where it's like the enemy, I think, attacks us and attacks our minds. And when you're in that place, if you're in depression or you're in the midst of trauma, and it's not so easy to just pull yourself out of that. But this is why I think that when we are strong enough to make the choice and to pull ourselves out of that, that's great. But this is why also, like, there's people like you that God places on your heart to come share your story with other people, share your trauma and the triumph, like not just the trauma, but what you've overcame, so that people can have hope and they can say, wow. Honestly, like when I talk to you, Andy, I think like I've been through things in my life. We've all people's had trauma on some level. But then you talk to someone like yourself who's been through, it's like trauma after trauma after trauma. And it's like, the whole world experiences pain. And, you look at another person that's like, oh my God, they've been through all of that. That makes my trauma look minuscule. But you have all these levels of different traumas. I'm sure there's other people that's been through torture or some of the worst atrocious things that you could imagine. And you're like, oh my God, like compared to them. But it doesn't matter because comparatively speaking, it's really only compared to what like ourselves. We can only make comparisons to ourselves. But at the end of the day, I'm saying all of that to say, at the end of the day, we've all experienced pain. And the beautiful thing about our human existence is that it's okay to feel pain or hurt or trauma or sadness or anger or any of these emotions. It's okay to feel those things. It's just not okay to sit in them for extended periods of time. Granted, now you do have situations like you brought up earlier, like when you were a child and you're experiencing abuse. That this breaks my heart because it's not so easy, especially in any abusive situation, when someone's there and they can't leave. Like a
Yeah.
kid can't just pack their bags and decide they're
Right.
going to go get another place.
Right.
So that's really, I think that is traumatic. And I've talked to guests and experts that's come on to the podcast and even talked about how this kind of like continuous trauma happening over and over and over, it's really hard and it's hard to overcome because it begins to shift identities in our minds. So then it makes it really hard to overcome. But
Yes.
I think that it's just like the powerful thing that you're really saying here is the power to choose. And if we can choose to focus on the positive, if we can choose to focus on healing, if we can choose to focus on purpose, and so on and so forth, all of these things, then once we do pull ourselves out of this situation, we have the power. Like to me, I look at you and I think you're like a superhero because you've pulled yourself out of this and you're not just wallowing in these things of like this happened to me, but you're actually doing something on a trajectory like writing books, overcoming life's biggest setbacks. That's huge because now you're inspiring and encouraging and empowering other people to then pull themselves out of that too.
Well, those are very kind words. I appreciate that. I have learned in life to never say it can't get worse. It in fact can get much worse. And to your point, I look at let's just take the situation of my son taking his own life. I look at that, and this may sound a little odd, but bear with me. Someone who loses a child to an illness, I would imagine that would be a real struggle to find some explanation for why my child had to die from cancer or some other thing. At least with Heston's suicide, I know who to hold responsible for that. Like I've at least got that out of it. I don't have to, like in my mind, that was not God's doing. That was Heston made that choice. But so I look at people who have lost children in other ways, and I think, holy cow, I am so thankful to not have had to live that experience, right? And then I've had some folks who have lost children to an illness tell me they're like, well, at least I can deal with an illness, but I don't know that I could survive if my child took his own life. And I was like, yeah, I guess it's just a good thing that we don't get as hard as those situations are, that we're able to, have the fortitude to survive. But it can absolutely always be worse, both in our lives and in other people's lives. And I do think hearing stories about, I read Man's Search for Meaning, and I was like, holy cow, I haven't had it that bad. Okay, like actually, I haven't had it that bad. And so yeah, when you can think, well, this person went through that, and so I'm not going through that, and if they could make it through what they went through, maybe I can make it here. Yeah. So I think it does help to hear and see other people survive things that we may not think we could have survived, although we probably could have, but we think we couldn't have survived. And we would never want to find out if we could survive them. But everyone else's setbacks, their problems, their challenges, their pain is paradoxically a way that we can look at ours and say, okay, it's not as bad as it could be. Someone else is surviving. That means there is a way, right? I may not be able to survive exactly like they did, but I can probably take some lessons from them. I think this is one of the reasons why it's important to have, some, like I call them core beliefs, but some things that are almost mechanical. They become mechanical over time, so you don't have to think about them it's almost like you've made the decision before something happens. And so you just react in a certain way to it. I know when I was much younger, I thought like, to your point about looking at other people, I thought, wow, I mean, I've had some difficult situations. I'm a young man, I'm angry, I've been hurt, I'm, not probably living my optimal life. And, but then I thought back to like my ancestors, like they came here, they settled in the area, you know, ages ago, one of them married a Native American woman, and they raised a family, and they built it. And it just like, and so it grows. And then you think, well, those people didn't have indoor plumbing, they didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have toilet paper, women didn't have feminine hygiene products, they didn't have anything. There were no pharmacies to go to get an Advil. There was nothing, and yet somehow they did all these things. Like, you know, if Ecclesiastes is right and there's nothing new under the sun, then they have experienced a lot of the stuff I'm experiencing. They just experienced it in, from what I would say is a much more difficult, time of existence. So I looked back and I wrote down 6 words. I worked to think, what is it about them that gave them the ability to ultimately and in some way build generational success over time? And the 6 words I came up with were honor, courage, determination, perseverance, wisdom, and success. And I'd kind of worked left to right with those. I kind of worked backwards and said, well, if you're successful, and if the story of Solomon's true, then you're going to need wisdom to truly be successful. And I don't mean like monetarily successful today or, like you're successful, but just broadly as a human being. To be successful, you may not be wise, but you're going to need some wisdom. And my grandfather always said that experience is what you get just after you needed it. And so wisdom was kind of based on experience. And so how would you get experience? Well, you'd have to persevere. The longer you could persevere, the more experience you get. That would mean that you would have some wisdom. And so as I worked backwards to those words, perseverance, back to determination, back to courage, back to, honor, kind of struck me that if we begin with an honorable intent, an honorable action, then when difficulties arise, knowing that we're doing something honorable, having meaning, an honorable meaning, will give us the ability to have courage. And if we have courage over and over again, even small little bitty pieces of courage, if we have it over and over again, that's what people call determination. They're like, wow, Amber's just determined. Well, what they've really observed is you having courage over and over again, right? Even if they don't know that's what it is, they've just observed it. And like, well, she's determined. And then if you show determination over and over again, people will say, man, you just can't get rid of Amber. She's just persistent. She just persistent. She just persists. And then if you persist, then you will have the experiences that will give you wisdom. You might not be wise, but you will have wisdom. And then wisdom being the foundation of success. And so that's where I started kind of collecting words, that would represent pictures in my mind of larger concepts. And then I wrote those down. Eventually, I have them tattooed on my arms. I have them on my shoulder, just below my shoulders on each arm, 3 words. So that, and I did that so that when I looked in the mirror, when I looked in my, if I ever looked down or in a difficult time, I would have remembrance. I would have something that I could look at and say, okay, you're just going to have to be determined. Okay, you have to persevere. And then I just started writing down these other things that I would observe that I found to be true. I would see them over and over again be displayed, either myself or in other people. And I was like, hey, you need to remember that. So when it all hits the fan, you need to remember that. And I would write them down. And those they started out as 1 and then grew to 15 things that I call core beliefs. They're things that I can rely on when I've been hit so hard that I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to feel. I'm not sure I can make the right decision. So I just fall back on almost my decision is to make no decision, just to fall back on these core beliefs. And I think they represent what I have observed are kind of the way the universe was designed, the way the creator designed the universe to operate. And so when you're in a place and you don't think you have the strength to make a decision, or in fact, you do not have the strength to make a good decision, I would humbly submit that you work before you get there to that place to instill in yourself some core beliefs that will carry you through those moments when you can't, you're not able, you've been hit so hard, the air's been knocked out of you, you're lying face down, metaphorically or possibly really, and you're just incapable of making a decision at that moment. You need something that almost kicks in, automatically. You don't have to decide. It just kicks in. And so that was to me the purpose of the core beliefs. And whether they're these or people have other, their own individual core beliefs, I just, would encourage people to instill those in their minds and in their hearts so that when it all goes wrong, you're in a position where you don't have to think. And I mean, if you look around, you see examples of that, special forces train and train and train so they don't have to think, right? They train themselves so they don't have to think. They just know that when this occurs, I take these actions and I just do them and it becomes automatic. Firemen trained so that they know when they go into, they don't have to think about a lot of things. They just know what to do. And I think the same thing applies to our characteristics when we're going through very difficult times. We need to have trained. So expect that it will go wrong. This is the world we live in. Train your mind to automatically rely on those core beliefs. I think that's why, people say, the Bible says you should study the scripture. Like, train your mind to think on these things, right? And so that when it all goes wrong, you have kind of a part of you that just automatically kicks in because you may be too devastated to think. So you need it to kick in and do the thinking for you.
Yeah, it's like going into automatic zone.
Yeah.
So like if you're have an emergency, you can get in your car and drive to the hospital and you're not like thinking about every single thing you're doing to drive.
Right.
It's like you're just in an automatic zone, like you're just
Right.
driving.
Yeah.
I love how you explain that. And I also really love how you put those words, like obviously those words are all very powerful and stand alone when they stand alone, but when they are like put together and then they're in a series, like working backwards, I love how you described that. Are those words the part of the 15 core beliefs that you have built for yourself?
I would say they're kind of a layer beneath. Like I think and when I say this, I'll tell you what one of the core beliefs is. I believe my spiritual beliefs are the true foundation of things, right? It gives one a perspective on the universe, on the world, on the bigger question of why that we can never really answer ourselves, right? And then I kind of layered those 6 words above that as almost like a kind of a visual, a step-by-step visual to say, well, if these are your beliefs, then you accept that there are going to be bad things that happen and you won't want them to happen. But for the part that you can make a decision about, it is to remind myself, are you making an honorable choice to begin with? Because it's kind of like a reminder to start there. Like don't start with, I want to be successful. Start with, are you doing the honorable thing today? Is this an honorable decision to make? And then work your way through, because there's going to be a lot of times when you're going to need courage if you make that decision. And sometimes, you've been through a traumatic event and it has just devastated you. It is honorable to continue breathing. And it may be a huge step, although one may not recognize it as such, but just getting out of bed today is courage. Putting one foot in front of the other is courage. And if you start seeing those things as courage in the pursuit of the honorable task of breathing, of surviving, of not giving up on the value that you have in this life, if you just do those things, those are all courageous. And if you do enough of those, you may be courageous over and over again and walk to the kitchen and be determined. That will show your determination to get to the kitchen to make yourself breakfast. And you may just not want to eat there. You may not want to, but you need to eat because you need energy to, our bodies are fuel. So then making breakfast might be courageous, And so you don't have to look at like all these big things about courage, because I think then it's like it's too big. It's like, well, my situation is down here and like I don't have the courage to go whatever, So if that's it. But you do have the courage. It is honorable to continue your life. And you do have the courage to put one foot in front of the other. And I think if humans viewed every step they take as courage, then, like that's courageous that you took another step forward, or that you took a step forward and you got knocked 2 steps back and then you started to take a step forward again. I think our perspective might change a little, right? Because then you start to feel like, wow, I am kind of courageous. Like I didn't think I was courageous. I thought I was kind of weak. I thought I had no control over my life, but I actually do have a little control over my life. And that's right. I am a little bit courageous, and I think I can take one more step. So that's, now, having said, the religious spiritual beliefs are the ultimate foundation. One of my core beliefs is be religious only about religion. And because, you're also going to have other experiences like in your relationships where, it's not really a battle between good and evil. Your spouse does not represent Satan. And so it's not a battle between good and evil. There might need to be some compromise in that situation. And so, I think a lot of times we get very dogma oriented about something, and we become very determined people that can then use that determination in every single aspect of our lives. And then that can actually be a hindrance to the plan that God has worked out for you, right? So, be religious about religion, about your spirituality, about religion. But I don't think God intended us to be dogmatic about whether, the type of butter that we use, should we put butter on biscuits or not?
Right.
I don't think that's something we should be religious about, right?
Absolutely.
I think that so I was kind of stretching a point to make a point, but yeah. So they are a layer beneath, but to me, they kind of support the core beliefs that I have relied on when I didn't know what else to do. The core beliefs are really that, for me, they're those things that kind of kick in, and the things that are aspirational, the things that remind me to go back and reset, that are between when I've had an event that has occurred and when I am able to start making progress again, like when I'm strong enough to do things. There is that space in between where you don't have the energy, you don't know what to do, you're just so beaten down. And so for me, I needed things that in that space between the time I could get back on my feet and start start walking again, what could I rely on that would kind of kick in automatically to get me through that spot? And that's what they represent.
Yeah, I love that. And this is such powerful conversation. I know that this is so helpful on so many levels for people. And I wish we had all day to divulge into more, but we're right there at an hour. And I do want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about your book, where people can find this, where people can find you, should they want to connect with you.
Yeah, the website is askandycampbell.com. And the reason it's Ask Andy Campbell is because when I was going through pancreatic cancer, I had been given about prognosis was about 6 or so months. I'm coming up on 7 years now. And, so after I didn't die at 6 months, people would ask my doctor or ask members of my family, or friends, they would say, well, what is he doing? Why is he not dead yet? What is he doing? And they would say, well, ask Andy and he'll tell you. And so I thought, the easiest thing to do is have a website, and I'll call it Ask Andy Campbell. And then people can contact me there, or they can sign up for a newsletter there, or they can find a link to the book there.
I love it. And I'll put that in the show notes as well for those of you who missed that or driving, can't listen, can't write it down. But so that'll all be in the show notes. So go get a copy of the book, Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks. I'm sure it's inspiring as this conversation is. So Andy, if you had a big, huge takeaway or something you'd really like to leave with my audience before we close up today, what would that be?
I think I mentioned this earlier on. I would say the most important thing is do not quit. Do not quit today. And the reason that you should not quit today is because if you quit, if you decide not to continue forward, if you give up today, then you are taking away from the Creator his ability to move the universe on his timeline to your favor in a way that you cannot imagine at this moment. And so don't quit, but more than just the words don't quit. Don't quit because the Creator is moving the universe to your favor, and probably in a way that is more than you could possibly think or imagine. So give it time. Continue to give it time, and don't quit.
I love that. That's such powerful advice. So thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing with us. And just thank you so much for your courage in sharing your story and all the different stories and different traumas that you have. I know it inspires people on multiple levels. So thank you, Andy.
The gratitude is all mine, Amber. I'm very appreciative for the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
Well, I loved having you. Thank you so much.
Hey there, friend. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time here with us on Through the Trauma podcast. Your presence means more than you know. If this episode has spoke to you or gave you hope or made you feel just a little bit less alone, then I would love it if you would take a second, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who truly needs to hear it. Every share, every comment, every listen, it all helps our message get out and reach those who truly need it the most. Healing happens inside of a community, and together we are breaking the silence and creating space for transformation. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You are not alone.